Hello everybody and welcome to Board With Each Other, the board gaming podcast that looks at board games and reviews board games through the lens of playing them as a pair, whether that's with a significant other or partner or with a friend or with the denizens of your zoo you're trying to entertain before feeding time. My name's Simpson and I'm joined as ever by my lovely co-host and player two, Hannah Kelly.
Hi guys.
And today we are tackling a big one. We are talking about the zoo building extravaganza that is Ark Nova.
Extravaganza is a good word.
I think extravaganza is a good word. Ark Nova is a heavy, guess you would call it a Eurogame. And the concept is you are building a zoo, you are populating that zoo with animals, you are diverting resources to scientific advancements, and you are working on conservation. The crux of the game is you have two basic score tracks, one for appeal and one for conservation, and what you're trying to do is get them to pass each other as far as possible. So you need to basically be doing both, and you need to do both really, really well in order to win the game. The game's played by each player selecting a zoo map, and you can either play these symmetrically, so everybody has the same map with the same sort of placement bonuses, or you can play it asymmetrically, where you have a different zoo map with different bonuses and different sort of mechanisms that go along with it. How you build your zoo is by building enclosures, which is basically achieved through a polyomino mechanic, where you take tiles from sizes 1 to 5 and you place them on a grid. Doing so will get you bonuses if you cover certain spaces, and you populate those with animals. The game is played via an action queue, so you have an action queue of 5 spaces, and on those 5 spaces are 5 cards. One allows you to build, one allows you to obtain animals, one allows you to draw more cards or take cards from a marketplace, of which there are 6 cards at all times. Another allows you to either partner up with different countries' zoos which have different mechanics, or devote scientific research into your zoo.
Donate to conservation
projects. Donate to conservation projects, which is probably the most important mechanism within the game. Sort of how you win as such is conservation projects net you conservation points, which are quite hard to come by. And the final action is around sponsorship, so you can get sponsors into your zoo, which acts a bit like animals but differently. They do certain things and certain mechanics within the game.
Or money.
Yes, or gain you money. So there is as you just said, sort of a money economy, so you get money every turn. Turns are not your typical back and forth affair. You have a tracker called a break tracker that you play back and forth, but a turn only fully ends when the break tracker reaches 0, and different actions that you take during the game cause the break tracker to increase. So there's a mechanism for controlling when you get your income, which you get every turn. There's an element of engine building, where when you donate to conservation projects, you take counters away from spaces on your zoo map, and those counters either give you an instant bonus or they give you something every turn when you gain your income. So that's the sort of the engine building side of it. Animals and sponsors and conservation projects. You start the game with some they're called base conservation projects out at the start, but sponsors and animals are gained through an enormous deck of cards. I think there must be about 250 to 300 cards in it. And you start the game with 4 of these, and you only ever draw new ones when you take an action to do so. When you take actions in your queue, you can take actions at any point within your queue, but the further along it is to the right, the stronger the action is. So, for example, if you took the build action and it was in the sort of 1 space, you'd be able to build a size 1 enclosure. In the 5 space, a size 5 enclosure. That's the simplest encapsulation of it. So you spend a lot of the game sort of weighing up which actions to take and when. You can't just sort of go, I'm just going to keep doing this over and over again. You've got to sort of mix them up, switch them out, and decide when it's best to do so to achieve what you're trying to achieve. I think I will probably leave it there in terms of rules, because it is a heavy game, and I don't want to drone on for 15 minutes about trying to explain the rules. But that is essentially it in a nutshell. I'm not sure I can really compare it to anything else I've played. I know I've seen comparisons to Terraforming Mars, which I've not played before, but it's a fairly unique combination of rule sets. There's quite a lot of iconography to learn. I think if you play something like Terra Mystica or the like, it's pretty daunting when you first crack it out and you first try and learn anything, but after a while you just start reading the language and it becomes second nature, really. Everything's fairly easy to understand once you understand what all the different icons mean.
So in terms of play time, I mean, it's on the longer end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I would say probably an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending. This is one of those games where there's no set timer to when the game ends. It's more the condition of your two scoring tracks crossing over, which gives you an element of control about when you want the game to end. To both players, but it also means game length can be slightly variable. But I can't see you getting through this in less than an hour and a half. Really, I find that very unusual.
We also have 2 expansions for it.
No, just one.
Okay, we just have one expansion for it, which is the marine animals,
Marine Worlds.
Marine Worlds. So you get a whole bunch of fish, which is nice. And
aquariums.
And aquariums, and we've got a couple of extra player mats as well.
Yeah, we've got the promo map packs.
Yeah.
Basically, or everything you can get for this at the moment. We've got and we played with. We have played with the base game a lot more than we played with Marine Worlds. And it's the base game essentially we'll be reviewing today. We might touch on some other things that Marine Worlds does. But yeah, it's definitely sort of the base game that we'll be reviewing, I think. So, this has started a bit of an odyssey, I think, for us. This started, should I say, we've had it for quite a while, into sort of heavier Euro games. And I think this really...
Well, I mean, we've always veered on the side of heavy. Like, I think we like a long and we like a complex game. But definitely, I think it really opened doors in terms of like that heavy Euros.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we both absolutely love about this is that as you progress in the game, you get these wonderful cascading effects. So where you achieve something and then that ticks something else off, which means you get something else, which means you get something else. And there's something really satisfying about that. Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that probably in greater detail later. But yeah, it's that Eurogame sort of itch that only they scratch, where you do something that sets off a chain of events almost, that I think this just really got us hooked on. So yeah, anything else you'd like to say before we head over into scoring?
No, let's get on with scoring.
Okay, because I think we've got quite a lot to talk about, yeah.
So our first category is components. So it is absolutely a board hog. Table hog.
Table, yeah.
It is absolutely massive. Your scoring track takes up most of the table.
Yep.
And that's where you lay your cards out. Your cards, as you said, the deck of cards is absolutely ginormous, to the point where I now can't shuffle it on my own. I have to shuffle it in, like, decks.
Yeah, particularly with the expansion out, which I think has, like, another 50 cards or so.
My hands aren't big enough.
It's just the most monumental deck of cards I think I've ever tried to shuffle. It's
bigger even than my Magic deck.
Yeah, and that's saying something.
Not as many bears, though.
No, definitely. Well, I don't know. There's quite a lot of bears in this, but yeah, your Magic deck probably have more bears. The deck itself is an absolute beast. It's really, really difficult to shuffle. It's maybe one think about card shuffler for the first time in a very long time, because it's just online impossible to shuffle properly.
But apparently, always knuckle your cards.
Yeah, I know, which is why I haven't done it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of components themselves, everything's kind of your standard cardboard and wood tokens.
Yeah.
There's nothing super flashy here. There's nothing you go like, oh, this is super deluxe or anything like that. It's fairly standard rudimentary. It does come with relatively good organisation trays, so you've got an awful lot of different cardboard, but particularly with the polyomino pieces, there's an awful lot of different shapes and sizes and whatnot, and it doesn't fit exactly super neatly, but it fits into the box. And
they tell you how best to organise it, which was absolutely amazing, because when we popped it all out, it was really overwhelming. They were like, we suggest you do this, and it was a very good idea.
Yeah, in terms of
handy. Thank you, Mr. Game Developer.
in terms of punching out, is probably the most intimidating I've seen outside of Gloomhaven. I mean, not nowhere near the level of Gloomhaven, but it was still like, oh my goodness, we've got a lot of stuff here. Like, where does this all go? But it does all fit back in the box.
The cards themselves, I don't know that they are all individual unique cards. I reckon
Yes, they
they
are.
a handful of flamingos.
No, they're all unique.
Are they all
Yeah,
unique?
every
That's a
card's
really,
unique.
really lovely touch. And the pictures on them are nice, but I mean, they're nothing.
They're photos.
Yeah,
So some people I know that does bother some people. Some people prefer artwork on their games. This is all photos, but they look good. They're nice, and most of the time you're looking at decent nature photos, which I mean I can't see many people complaining about that. You've got the sponsors, which are random guy staring at the camera kind of thing sometimes. But the animal
They're not
photography,
photos.
yes, they are.
Are they?
Yeah, they're not drawings.
Yeah, I kind of want to pull the box out now.
They're not drawings.
I'm pretty sure they're not.
No, I can say with 100% certainty that they are photographs.
All right, okay. I'm going to look at this afterwards and we're going to put a footnote on this
You
episode.
really need to cut down on mushrooms. That's a joke for legal purposes. But yeah, it is photographs, so that does bother you, fine. But nature photographs, cool,
With the Marine Worlds expansion, we got upgraded tokens for the tokens that we use to donate to conservation projects, and they're on the shape of little animals.
Yes.
So I play yellow, and I've got monkeys.
And
You
I've got
play black,
penguins,
and you've got penguins.
Which makes me very happy, because
'Cause
penguins
penguins
are
are-
my favourite animal.
Yes.
And they also give you upgraded tokens in the expansion for the different scoring tracks, because they're all the same, just wooden cylinders to start with, but they've you get slightly upgrades, so that's a bit like, ooh, cool, but, definitely not essential.
Yeah. And they also changed the action cards as well, but we won't get into that.
No, that's
the premise, it's still essentially the same, it's
Yeah,
just slightly different.
That's a conversation for another day, I
Yes.
think. But yeah, the only thing that I don't like is the flimsiness of the zoo maps themselves. I think I've been spoilt by a few other things. Scythe with its gorgeous multi-layered player boards. Even something like Terra Mystica, which is quite thick and cardboard and weighty. The zoo maps themselves are printed on basic cardstock, and if you're not careful, I could see them getting bent quite easily, warped quite easily. They could rip quite easily.
And they're quite large, actually.
They are quite large, but I think one of the issues I have is I just wish the actual zoo part. I know this would increase the cost of the game, but was a little bit sunken in, but like Scythe, because if you nudge it, or particularly towards the end of the game, you've got chaos.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've had an instance where we've knocked something and it's all gone flying, but that potential is absolutely there. And after an hour and a half game, that could literally just draw it to a close. I appreciate that it will put the cost of the game up, but it's pretty much the only sort of production style bugbear I have with it. I just wish there was a slightly more deluxe version of that, because it's that security. Like, if I knock this off, the entire thing's wasted. But I think that's the only thing I would hold against it as such. I think everything else is fine.
I would say that we play it a lot more if it weren't such a table hog.
Yeah, we've got to rearrange our living room to play it.
However, that said, in terms of setup and strip down, it's really not that bad, given the number of components that you've got, the massive deck that you've got. Actually, it doesn't take all that long.
No, it doesn't. Setup and tear down is not as daunting as it looks. I think because so many of the components actually come out during the gameplay.
Yeah.
It's not one of those games where you have to sit there putting things in place all over the place. You just shuffle the deck, which is its own challenge, but essentially you just draft things, pick your mats, lay things out, and then you're good to go.
Yeah.
Putting it away takes a little bit longer, but not that much. Again, things are quite well organised, so you just quickly rip everything back into its proper place, and that's a done and dusted.
So how did you score it?
I went for an 8.
Yeah, so I was tempted to give it an 8, but I went for a 7 in the end.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I think...
Yeah, I think a little bit of deluxification would have gone a long way on this. But it's perfectly fine and perfectly serviceable. I mean, 8's a great score. It looks great, looks nice. So yeah, I can't fault it too much.
Okay, so on to complexity.
Yes. So, as always, this is not just how complex a game is and scoring highly, because that's how well the complexity of the game serves the gameplay.
So, it is a complicated game.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's definitely not like beginner entry level game. And there is a lot of icons to get your head around, and even now I'm like, oh, what does this mean?
Yeah, I mean, those tend to be for the ones that we don't use very often. I think once you learn something after a couple of times, it just gets sort of embedded, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's one of those games that looks like everything's written in hieroglyphics when you start.
Yeah, and it largely is. What I will say is that actually, when you get your head round it and you get the actions and what they do, it's not so bad.
No.
It's still not an easy game.
No.
But I don't think it's too complicated, particularly.
No. And it doesn't feel overcomplicated. I think that's an important thing for this category. It is very, very... It's heavy, but it doesn't feel like you've got loads of fiddly little rules all over the place. Like, everything kind of slots together quite neatly. Everything makes sense. I don't think there's anything where you're constantly going back to the rule book. I mean, for such a heavy game, aside from looking up icons, I don't think I've referred to the actual rules since we learnt it properly. Or had to. I think, everything flows quite well.
Yeah.
There were a few mechanisms that I think were very new to me that took a while to embed, like the whole concept of the break counter and how that works, and a turn is not a turn until you've got to go through a round and all that kind of thing. I think one of the things that I still struggle a little bit with is the end of game scoring. I think there's when your paths cross, you have to do some moving of counters and some subtraction, and you can end up with negative victory points, for example.
Which happened to me.
Yeah, and it does feel a little bit overwrought. However, in the expansion, they have changed that. Although we've always scored it the way it was originally scored, so I haven't bothered to change that. But they have simplified a little bit with the expansion. Yeah,
I think one of the things that I don't necessarily have an issue with the fact that endgame scoring is a bit complicated or a bit overwrought. I think what I really struggle with is that it makes it really difficult for me to work out who is actually going to win this, particularly when it's quite close, and where I would get most bang for my buck. Because one of the other really important rules is that once one person, their tokens cross each other, that triggers endgame, but it means everybody else that plays gets one more turn. So you can choose to get yourself and net yourself a few more victory points, and it's working out whether actually maybe appeal is better or whether conservation would net you more points. And that becomes really quite difficult because it's so complicated. Yeah,
although there is a little bit, I have to say, for me, you say it's a bug, I say it's a feature. I like the obfuscated scoring of it. I like not... I think with a game like this, not knowing exactly who's going to win is to its advantage. I think particularly with long, heavy games, because if you get a long, heavy game that the winner is clear halfway through the game, you can lose interest completely.
But what I will say is, because it is such a large game, there are many paths to victory.
Oh yeah,
so actually I've been completely screwed over at one point and gone, well, sod this, I'm going to go for something completely different, and it allows you that versatility.
There's a huge breadth of strategy that you can do with this. I mean, I think I read something about some people who just go absolutely crazy on the appeal track the whole game, and just it puts them so far ahead. Then all they need to do is just net a few conservation points and finish it.
Yeah.
So that and the opposite is true. You could get you could have a zoo with no animals really. You just concentrate on other things and conservation and just get the conservation points up. But does it serve the gameplay? Absolutely. I think it wouldn't be the same game without the level of complexity. I think they stopped at just the right time, which I think often when we have this conversation, sometimes a bit like, oh, this is a little bit overwrought, there's something about it a bit overwrought, or this is missing, this is one mechanic away from greatness. This is the one that I have to say hits the sweet spot in terms of it is exactly as complex as it needs to be. I have one bugbear and one only.
Do you just complain about final scoring?
Well,
two bugbears.
the final scoring was not really a complaint. It's just it's complicated and slightly overwrought, very slightly. But as I said earlier, I like the fact that it obfuscates scoring a little bit. The one issue I have is a lot of your animal cards, they won't just net you appeal. They will do something when you bring them out.
Yep.
There are these for want of a better term, debuffs that you can do to your opponent.
Yep, so these usually come from reptiles, they're usually snakes, and they allow you to, like, constrict or venom or something like
things
that.
like draining money from your opponent or stopping them taking the actions to their full effect. I find that mechanic a little bit tacked on. I don't think it happens often enough for it to be a useful mechanism within the strategic gameplay.
I completely disagree with that because I think it's really thematic. So if you look at some of the other...
How's the thematic? You're setting your stakes on your opposing zoo.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So there are other ones that will allow you to build things, they will allow you to, like, go through cards, and they all kind of have some sort of synergy with the actual animal you're playing. I love that. If I'm playing a game that involves animals, I want my animals to do stuff.
I'm looking forward to Ark Nova 2, This Is War, where it's just a full-scale zoo warfare game.
What animal would you pick? Clearly I would pick reptiles.
Well, still penguins, just for the comedy effect.
Komodo dragon.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we agree to disagree. I think if it was a larger presence within the game, I think I'd feel differently about it. I think that we've had whole games where it never happens at all.
That's because there are only so many reptiles, there are only so many snakes.
I know that, but again, I still it feels like it just feels unnecessary. I don't think it needs it.
You're unnecessary.
I'm not though. Perfectly necessary.
It's fab. It's wonderful. Who doesn't want a viper to do, like... Who doesn't want a black mamba to fuck someone's shit up?
Oh, no, I have to do the explicit tag. Great, thanks. Right. So what did you score it for complexity then?
9.
Same. Yeah, like I say, I mean, this is an absolute sweet spot. The only thing stopping it from being a 10 is that, for me, to be honest. I haven't found another game that just feels so right in its level of complexity.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we move on to shelf life?
Yeah.
And value for money.
And value for money. So I don't know how much this cost. I never know how much these things cost.
Don't ask, don't tell. Ark Nova is not that bad price-wise. I think it retails you tend to be able to pick up a copy somewhere between £40 and £50, which
that's exceptionally good value. I
which
think.
is what I paid for this. I think on the value for money side, 0 complaints.
Yeah. You get an awful lot of bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of tokens, really nice inserts. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In terms of replayability, I mean, this is probably our number one pick, one of our number one rotation games.
Yeah, we have played Ark Nova a lot.
Huge amount of replayability. We've already talked about the massive deck and the massive stack of cards. So actually, even that in itself never gets old and never gets dull. You've got different maps that give different abilities. Your sponsors will completely change the way in which you play your game, and you get different victory cards as well. So that also changes your agenda and your focus. So huge amounts of replayability.
Yeah, there's enough difference. Is that glorious combination of asymmetry and variety, which I think just adds to an equation of endless replayability, really. I mean, I can see you start to get bored eventually, maybe. I don't know, but I'm very, very far away from that point. It hasn't even started to vaguely bore me in any way.
No, I would definitely get it out a lot more if it weren't just the table hogs, those things.
Yeah, at the time as well. It takes a long time to play.
Yeah.
I think those 250 cards, I mean, you get a completely different sort of spread of cards every time you play. As you mentioned, your scoring cards are sort of denote what you're going to focus on, change every time, and the depth of strategy. There's so many different ways you can approach trying to win.
And you can pivot as well. I mean, I said this earlier, your cards are not in your favour, sod that, I'm going to do this instead. Yeah,
it's definitely not the kind of game where they are optimal strategies, and if you miss it and don't get locked in early enough, you lose it. It's not that kind of game.
No.
Not at all. I think... I'll touch on this a little bit more than sort of the fun side of things, but you have to kind of deal with what the game presents you with.
Yeah.
And I think that adds to the replayability because it's not static. It's not something you just sort of, you eventually develop an optimum strategy and just try and stick to that kind of thing. It doesn't work like that, which is great. I mean, in terms of shelf life, definitely one of the better ones I found. I've still got no qualms about returning to it every time we bring it out. I'm just like, it's not like, we're playing Ark Nova again, but never.
No.
So yeah, I've given it a 9.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So fun.
It's really fun.
Yes.
Yes, it is. I always have a blast playing this.
Yeah.
I think, going back to what you said at the start when we were talking about the rules, there are moments in this game, and they happen almost every game, where you do something that sets off a chain reaction of awesomeness that just goes on and on and on. It's like, oh, now this, and now I get this, and now this, and now I get this, and this happens, and boom, bang, bang. And that is great. It's every time it happens, it's so satisfying.
And even just your end game, so when you when you get to the end of the round and your break counter hits, you often trigger an awful lot of end of round bonuses. So that's not just about income, which by the way can also tick over quite nicely, and that can be lovely suddenly when you're getting like 40 odd income.
Because you feel quite poor at the start, and later, late game, if you play your cards right, you're just rolling your money basically, which is really fun.
Yeah. And your sponsor cards will allow you to gain income or even things to happen like during a turn. And yeah, it feels really satisfying.
Yeah. There's a great mechanism of the marketplace and taking cards from the marketplace. So I think that adds to the fun for me because it allows things to be a bit more strategic. You're not just sort of drawing a card every turn and dealing with what you get. You can really construct where you're going depending on what cards fill out that marketplace, and you can also get other cards that allow you to reset cards in the marketplace, replenish it and all that kind of thing. So that really adds to it for me. And again, to go back, it's the depth of strategy. I never feel like I'm doing the same thing I've done before in games of this. I'm always feeling, oh, this is slightly different. I'm doing something slightly different. Oh, this worked last time. Let me try that this time. And yeah, it's just that variety factor.
Yeah, absolutely. So how would you score it?
I've scored a 9.
So I scored it an 8.
Okay,
the
that's
reason
interesting.
I didn't score it higher was because I guess there's still one other game I would always pull out above it. We never get to play it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, there's no emergent storytelling in Ark Nova aside from the fact that you're getting you decide to get a whole load of raccoons.
Although maybe then that means I should score it a 9, and actually Arkham Horror should be 10. But I mean,
yeah, fine. I think.
And would I pull out Gloomhaven over this? I would pull out Gloomhaven over this.
You would pull out Gloomhaven over this. Yeah, fair enough. But I mean, they are very different things. Very different beasts.
They are.
I think one of the only things that might hold us back a little bit for me, depending on my mood, is there is a lack of intensity to it.
I disagree.
If you compare it to something like Dune Imperium or Terra Mystica or other sort of heavy Euros, I think there are moments in those games that make me almost want to stand out my seat sometimes, and things get really nail biting and really intense. I've never got that feeling from this. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just worth mentioning for me. Yeah,
so I'm going to talk about that more under the 2-player rating.
Okay.
Thing.
Yeah, fair enough.
However, what I would say is I get that feeling within myself.
Okay.
So as in, I've come up with my strategy, or I think I know what I'm going to do, and I'm trying desperately to do it before the end of the round because I want this to happen, or but I have that. It's very much internalised.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, all right, but yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because I didn't mention it before. Okay,
all right. So we'll do end of round scoring.
Right, so we add all that up and average it out as always, and that gets us a overall rating of 8.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty decent.
Yeah, pretty decent.
It is a good game.
It is a fantastic game. Worthy of an 8.
So, next we are on to our 2-player ratings.
Yes.
So this is thinking specifically about how it plays as a 2-player game. And the first one is table talks. That includes things like getting to know you, how much dead time, dead space.
Yeah, dead air.
Dead air. There is.
Something.
We talk constantly when we play this.
We do. It's quite a chatty game. But
there's lots to narrate, I think. I'm doing this, I'm playing this, and can I have this? And
yeah, there's quite a lot of sort of narration that goes along with it. I also think while it's a strategic game, it's also quite a gentle one. So I think it gives I think with that lack of intensity comes a little bit more space where we'll be... I tend to find we're quite chill when we're playing this compared to some other games.
Yeah.
And that table talk might not necessarily always be exactly about the game either. I think we'll have the odd conversation or what have you while we're playing and in between and whatnot.
Which actually is quite rare, I think.
That is quite rare.
There's either too much space and it's too thinky, so we don't have a conversation in between. Whereas that's not the case with this. There is very little trash talk.
No, but there's almost the opposite with this, where I tend to find myself complimenting you on a move a lot in this more than other game, because it doesn't have that feel that you're trying to beat me. It's just like you're both trying to build a better zoo.
Yeah.
There'll be times where you go, I'll be like, well done, that's amazing, well, good job, and vice versa. I think it's just that kind of game that promotes that kind of thing. So it's an interesting one. In terms of actual, discussing, I don't know, it's a hard one. The sort of traditional table talk around, strategizing and all that kind of thing, even in a competitive game, I don't think it exists so much in this. But
no, because you wouldn't want to, because you don't want to reveal your victory conditions
you don't want to show your hands and such.
And stuff like that. And so there is no emergent storytelling. You're not playing characters that are doing stupid shit, but yet there is this kind of evolving sort of humour and in jokes that we have. So you and your elephants, me and my trash panda. You know, and so there is that kind of jovial banter to it as well. Which that's probably because we played it so much.
You just develop your own lore when you play it that much. Oh yeah, she has to have the raccoons. You've got to have trash pandas.
I mean, it's true. I would actually. We've had long conversations about how it's not okay.
I'm very happy we don't live in the US.
Yeah, because I think
you'd have adopted one by now.
Yeah, we would have done. Yeah, I would have done.
Okay, so what did you score up a table talk then?
So I have decided on an 8.
Okay, I've gone for 7. I think it's good. It's nothing sort of amazing in terms of that, but it's good. Okay, on to competitiveness then. It is a competitive game.
It is a competitive game, and it is highly competitive because you are ultimately trying to build the more appealing zoo, but it's not antagonistic.
No.
And I think that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. Because of that, you don't get the trash talk. Because of that,
you don't really get the feeling like you're negatively impacting the other player too much.
Yeah.
I think that's why I go back to that reptile mechanism feeling a little bit out of whack. It feels a bit tacked on to the game. It doesn't feel like it's in the spirit of the rest of the game.
And so, because it's not antagonistic, and because you're not in that head-to-head
battle over resources and space or anything like that.
It does lack that intensity. But equally, then I think it gives breath to a lot of other stuff that perhaps you wouldn't have. So the fact that we have lots of conversation and it's much more, jovial.
But does that make it less competitive? For me, a little bit. Like it's not massive and it's not a detriment, but it does make it a bit less competitive. If I look at it from that lens, as this sort of dual aspect, which I think I always look at with this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's largely because you are still playing against yourself to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be a dick. So, for example, you try to build petting zoos, and I'm like, I know for a fact you're going to want that card, so I'm going to snap that card and trash it. Just to get rid of it. So you can do that.
You can block opponent's strategy. If you could see your opponent's strategy, you can block it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's the detriment to yourself, because you could have used that to snap something you needed instead.
Yeah. So there are those options, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
And it's not on the surface. There's sort of a deeper level into it that you'd only start doing once you played it quite a lot.
Yeah.
And you know the strategies. Once you understand what people are trying to accomplish, which can take quite a while, and I think we're still learning that after God knows how many games, then you can start blocking people and being a little bit more disruptive to their plans.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't call it a solitaire game that you play together either.
No.
It doesn't have that feel. I think because of the interrelation and the visibility of the scoring tracks all the way through, I think that's the element for me, and that sometimes competing over particular cards. And with the conservation projects, you can only donate to them once, and once somebody gets in there at the higher level, you're then shut out and you have to go for the lower level. So there's that. That's where I find the competitiveness sets, because you can see visibly what people are going for, because that's all open information.
So just to give you an example of the conservation point, so this kind of makes a bit more sense, it might be that you have donate to Africa. So you would have to have 4 animals or four icons, 4 Africa icons, in which case you then net 3 conservation points. But the next one is you need to have 3 Africa icons and you only get 1 conservation point, for example.
Yeah, for example. And that's shared, so it's not that solitaire thing. You're
Yeah.
both going for the same thing. You're both trying to occupy that same space, so it's a race.
Yeah. And
Essentially.
yet, I'm never racing. I still don't feel like I'm racing against you because I have to deal with my action cards and the order that they are. So it's me thinking ahead, and it's fine. I know that I've got some time, so there's no point pulling that trigger because you've got no Africa icons out, for example.
But I think the difference is there's still that strategization to win that race, regardless if you're doing it directly or indirectly. You are still doing something to get there before somebody else, which I think some of these games that are solitaire together kind of thing, not that there's anything wrong with that, but lack that element.
Yeah.
There's no shared space, it's all just personal.
Yeah.
So that's where I think it's slightly more competitive. The question I always ask myself with this is how good does it feel to win? Above average for me. I'm not like, I really, really want to win with Ark Nova. I always try and win, but it's not to the same level as some other games that we play.
No, I mean, June, I think, is probably the most head-to-head intense game that we probably have in terms of, that
trying very hard
competitiveness.
to win.
It's a world away from that. I don't even feel particularly bitter when I lost spectacularly.
No.
Because
it's a really fun journey.
Yeah, it is a really fun... It's the journey. It's the journey.
It's not the destination. But does that make it a slightly less competitive game? Maybe.
Maybe.
And given all that, I've given it a 7.
Oh, so I gave it an 8.
Fine. Okay. And our final category is about scalability and FOMO. How well does it play at 2 players? And do you feel like you're missing out if you're playing with less than 2 players?
Okay. So just to reiterate, a high score would be that it's great. It's a 10 would be like it's a perfect 2-player, and 1 would be it's terrible.
It's borderline unplayable at 2.
So I've got my scores the wrong way around. How long have we been doing this?
You hear that, people? It's borderline unplayable at 2. I'm going to counter that by saying it's the perfect 2-player game.
Right. So also, we haven't played this at 3 or more.
No,
so we don't
haven't.
have a benchmark for comparison.
But I can see it.
Yes. I think also what I have read is that as soon as you start adding more people, actually what happens is that somebody does fall behind very quickly, and it becomes a very long slog for them, knowing they're going to lose.
And I think slog is the particular word there, because I imagine playing this for 4 players is actually a bit of a slog.
Yes.
Because you'll have quite a lot of downtime before your turn rolls around again, and it is a long game. And I can see this running 3 hours for 4 players easily.
Particularly if you like to talk and wander off and do your own thing.
I mean, a sprinkle of AP and people who are talking and not constantly engaged and breaks, this could go an entire afternoon.
I think the other
players.
point to note is that you've got a marketplace of 6 cards, and certainly when we play towards late stage where we've got perks that allow us to snap, so pull cards sort of immediately they've been drawn, very, very quickly, actually your marketplace runs dry.
Yeah.
And so it's very conceivable that at the end of, the round, you're really, struggling. You can always draw cards from the deck, but equally...
Late game, that's not really a viable strategy.
It's not a viable strategy, and you need to be snapping what's out there because you need to start making very calculated bets. You need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, you're making calculated decisions.
Decisions, not bets, yeah.
Yeah. There are slight differences. If you play it with 3 or 4, you get more conservation projects that you can donate to out.
Yeah, breaks take longer. You've got more time.
Yeah, you've got more time before breaks.
The end of round.
So I can't comment on the balancing changes that makes, but I don't see why you would play this at anything aside from 2.
Yeah, there is that fluidity that I think that happens when we play it 2, which is there's always something going on, we're always talking, we're always narrating, whereas actually I think it would really change that flow of gameplay if you played with more people.
Yeah.
And I think that would ruin it for me.
Yeah, I think it would. I don't think it would ruin it for me, but I don't think it would be the same game. Yeah. I don't think I would enjoy it as much. It's definitely not a game. If a heavy board game came around that I'd choose to pull out, I'd much rather pull out something else, just because I think it would be to its detriment.
Yeah.
And I think this is that unicorn since we started doing the podcast that I've been looking for, where it's like this has got a range of player counts 1 to 4. It's the first time I'm saying absolutely categorically this is best at 2. This is how 2 is how you should play this, in my opinion.
Okay, so I scored it an 8, and I scored it an 8 because I don't feel like I can make that decision because I haven't played it with more.
I am giving it a 10, a very rare 10, because I think it absolutely it's one of those games where I just think was made with two in mind. For some reason, I just don't see how playing it with more would improve it in any way. In fact, I think it would be worse.
Yeah, I do think it probably would be worse. And yeah, I don't miss not having a third player, but I can't push that score up.
Okay, well, I'm gonna
Hannah's abstract.
I'm gonna stick
Hannah's random scoring.
I'm gonna stick my neck on the line and give a very rare 10 because I don't give 10s very often. But I think this is the one of all the ones that we've reviewed. I'm like, this is the one.
I think I gave a 10 to Carcassonne at one point.
Did you give a 10 to Carcassonne?
Yeah, I gave 10 to Carcassonne for components.
Okay.
God, I guess the only positive score.
Nemesis doesn't get a 10 from you for components, but Carcassonne does.
So if you've enjoyed Hannah's random scoring, tune in next month.
Who knows where we will go? Great. Okay. Well, on that note, the scoring's made up. The points don't matter. So that gives us an overall 2-player rating of 8. So an 8 and an 8. It's a great game, and it's great to 2 players. How much we love Ark Nova, an 8 almost seems a disservice to it, I think. But I think that's fair. I think an 8 is a realistic score for something like this. It's a fantastic game. For me, it's an all-timer. And I see it going down as a proper classic in years to come.
I don't think this will ever get taken off our shelf.
No, absolutely. I can't ever see myself parting with it. If you like modern medium to heavy or heavy board games, I
don't think it's medium. It's definitely heavy.
Yeah, well, whatever. I genuinely guarantee you should have a good time with this. So, on that note, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. As always, if you do enjoy what we put out there, we'd very much appreciate a review on your podcast medium of choice. You can always interact with us on social media if you want to. But until next time, have fun, play lots of board games.